Shalom, this is Ken Ami. What I thought to do today is to talk a little bit about the issue of alien, quote unquote alien. And there's many ways to define alien, but that's a side issue. Let's just say aliens, right? Not of this world. From what? Where? We don't know. It depends. Somewhere else in our solar system, in our galaxy, in our universe, from another galaxy, somewhere else in the universe, from another dimension. Who knows? Just set that aside for a second. Because this has to do with something I wrote about in my book, A Worldview Review of Stephen King's It, the mystical, mysterious, and metaphysical in the novel, miniseries, and movies. That was in 2019. And as I was writing that book and going through all that material, I noticed Stephen King was getting onto something. So I'm going to read some quotations from the text of the novel and or the movies that bring out some facts or facts within fiction, perhaps sci-fi of the horror kind, about how there's this trope of aliens being after some sort of energy. Okay, sometimes it's in the form of literal just energy, in a sort of style that we would call maybe psychic vampirism. And in the case of it of course, Pennywise the Clown, Robert Gray, all these terms it goes by, the spider, it is an alien, no question about it. It's not of this earth, it came here. So Stephen King writes, it had come here long after the turtle withdrew into its shell, here to earth, and it had discovered a depth of imagination here that was almost new, almost of concern. This quality of imagination made the food very rich. Its teeth rent flesh, gone stiff with exotic terrors and voluptuous fears. Okay, so what he's telling us in this tale is that this alien really enjoyed the food source it found here on Earth. And what made it so enjoyable was that on Earth it found imagination, so that this imagination was used as a weapon against us. So for instance, this is why there's so many permutations of the it character, because it can tap into your deepest fear and manifest itself to you as that. But why? Not just due to terror for terror's sake, but in order to cause a biochemical reaction within your body that would then cause it to produce certain chemicals into your bloodstream, and that would marinate your meat, your body. So this gets into the area of the consumption of adrenochrome, particularly, which is one of the byproducts of terror, being terrorized, a sense of horror, or in other words, being traumatized. This is why this gets into MK Ultra type of territory, because of the byproducts of trauma, being traumatized, being tortured, and all these horrible things. They have certain biochemical reactions within our bodies. Okay, so the story goes that people who consume blood, and for more than just like hipster vampire reasons, who are supposedly really seriously into the consumption of blood, is that they're after these chemicals, okay, for various reasons. And so this crosses over into these stories of quote unquote aliens, whether they're stand ins for the human elite, whether they're stand ins for something demonic, okay, that's something to think about. So, what I commented in my book regarding this is that the reason it liked Earth is that it had discovered a depth of imagination here, and that this quality of imagination made the food very rich, is deeply telling, especially when correlated to the specifics that its teeth rent flesh, marinated, as I would put it, with exotic terrors and voluptuous fears. So then, at that point in my book, I point out this may be a hint to that about which I will speculate in chapter The MK Interpretation of It. So there's a whole chapter where I correlated this tale with that of the MK Ultra CIA's experiments. So this would denote the concept that those who engage in blood drinking, and here I wrote in parenthetically, for more than hipster vampire reasons, do so inflicting trauma to their victims so as to heighten the levels of adrenochrome, bilirubin, etc. in the blood. Okay, so that's a pigment formed in the liver by the breaking down of hemoglobin and excreted in the bile. So this is just another of the chemicals that would be produced by the body due to trauma or terror type of experiences. And I wrote, it prefers the taste of human meat, and I'm quoting from the novel here, was especially hungry for boy meat after it is saturated with such chemicals which, or so it would seem, are produced and released by the body due to the sentience of the organism, which reacts with traumatic terror to having its life threatened. And then I noted, it will later be stated, quote, it had even fed on a few of the older ones over the years. Adults have their own terrors, and their glands could be tapped, opened, so that all the chemicals of fear flooded the body and salted the meat. Okay, so it's very clear, very explicit that Stephen King, and this is back in the 80s, was telling us of this correlation between aliens and consumption of the human body, particularly as marinated by the blood that was soaked in these chemicals that otherwise wouldn't be flooding it. Then I noted the 2017 movie makes a vague reference about such concepts within the text of Mike Killing Sheep. Quote, if the animal senses what you're about to do, if it starts to fear you, adrenaline courses through its body and changes the taste. Okay, so there's kind of like a punt, as it were, to that. The reason that, for the same reasons perhaps we could say that it was doing it, then humans shouldn't do it to animals, because it changes the blood, it changes the meat. Okay, and I also, in the book, I quoted psychologist Melissa Hoggle. She noted some interesting aspects of our general love, of our fears, particularly as manifested via movie monsters. Quote, increased pulse, labored breathing, wide eyes, open mouth. These bodily reactions can be caused by fear as frequently as they can sexual arousal. And yeah, I mean, how many horror movies feature scantily clad women, right? And part of the point of which being that, you know, the significant other you brought to the movies with you becomes scared, and you get to drape your arm around in comfort. And so you develop this absolutely psychotic correlation in your mind between horrendous terror, brutality, and violence, and sexual arousal. And then you wonder why our culture is in such shape, right? Moreover, she says, when the limbic system, a group of structures in the brain dealing with emotions and behavior, is excited, it releases chemicals, norepinephrines, dopamines, that result in an adrenaline rush. And then lastly, I mean, this is quite the trope. For example, I'm writing a series of books and I review movies with alien and UFO themes. And one of them is going to be Life Force, which is not a movie I recommend, but the whole premise is psychic vampirism. I mean, they're literally feeding off your energy. In this case, it's Stephen King. It's a lot more direct. It's not psychic, it's actually physical. It's the consumption of the body and blood, right? And recently in the 2020 movie Sputnik, here's a quotation from that goes along the same exact lines, even though it appeals to a different chemical. So this is about the alien that they have trapped. We tried feeding it everything from lab rats to pigs, and then Semidarov ordered that one of the convicts be sent into the enclosure. Did you see how it behaved in the enclosure? It doesn't just need to kill. It's important for the victim to see it and become afraid. The highly developed human brain releases a lot of cortisol when afraid. On this planet, we are the champions when it comes to fear. This creature essentially feeds on cortisol. So, same exact, okay, same exact premise, just a variation thereof, right? The alien seeking to terrorize us, as they've been very, very famous and infamous for doing so, in order to result in energy, either psychic energy or literal manifestations of chemicals that they would then presumably consume somehow or other. So that's telling us something about how these beings are viewed, not just by ufologists in some sense, some ufologists, but also in pop culture, which is that there's correlation between an entity that is inhuman, and the consumption of, for example, adrenochrome is, the most well-known chemical that they would be after in rituals of consuming blood. So I just thought to put that out there for further thought and discussion, and get it on the record. I published all that in 2019, and it's something that is being picked up on a lot more by a lot more people. And there was Stephen King talking about it back in the 80s, many moons ago. So that'll do it for now.